He wakes in a forest he doesn't recognize, his body humming with power he can't explain. The name Cain is all he remembers. Then a child's plea cuts through the chaos. "Mighty man, please help me. My mother was taken by enemies." What follows will redefine what it means to be human. The first thing he knew was shattered branches against a gray sky. The smell hit him next, burnt air and copper. Pain came in waves from everywhere at once. His head pounded. His ribs ached. He pushed himself up, his hands digging into soft earth. Every leaf rustle echoed like thunder. Every bird call sliced through the silence. He stood too fast. His body responded with a speed that felt unnatural, almost violent. His muscles coiled and released with a precision that startled him. He looked at his hands. Scratches ran across his knuckles, deep enough to show raw tissue beneath. Even as he watched, the blood slowed. The skin began to stitch itself together. He flexed his fingers. The pain faded. It wasn't right. Nothing about this felt right. The forest around him told a story he couldn't read. Trees were splintered at chest height. Patches of ground were scorched black. The soil turned to glass in places. Metallic debris lay scattered, twisted shards that gleamed dully in the filtered light. He moved through the wreckage, his steps quiet despite the carpet of broken branches. He found the first body 20 paces from where he woke. A hunter, clad in armor that looked both advanced and foreign. The chest plate was caved inward as if struck by a massive force. The helmet visor was cracked, revealing empty eyes beneath. He counted 5 more, all dead. All killed the same way. Brutal, direct impacts that bypassed their gear entirely. No blades, no energy burns, just raw physical power. He stood among them, his breathing steady despite the tightness in his chest. His mind remained blank, refusing to provide context or memory. Only one word surfaced, drifting up from the emptiness. Cain. It felt like a name, his name. And the bodies at his feet. They suggested a truth he wasn't ready to face. He had done this. The damage, the violence, the sheer efficiency of it all pointed back to him. He was the weapon that had fallen among them. A soft sound broke the silence. Not the wind. Not an animal. It came from behind a fallen log a few yards away, a faint, shaky intake of breath. Then a small voice, trembling but clear, cut through the heavy air. A small figure rose from behind the fallen log. Green skin, large dark eyes, and a face etched with fear and something else. A hard-edged determination that didn't match her size. She stepped forward slowly, her movements cautious but deliberate. Her gaze never left him, taking in his height, his unfamiliar features, the way he stood among the dead hunters. She had seen everything. The violence, the speed, the way he moved through them like they were nothing. Her eyes told that story clearly. She spoke in a low, rapid dialect, the words tripping over each other in her urgency. Her voice held a tremor, but her words did not falter. She called him Mighty Man, a title that landed with the weight of an accusation. It felt wrong, alien. Yet part of him recognized the truth in it. Her people had a name for beings like him. Metalmen, enemies, destroyers. Every story she had ever heard warned against his kind. She had been taught to hide, to run, to never engage. But lessons mean little when your world has already ended. Her mother was taken just hours ago. The metalmen came with their silent weapons and their flying machines. They took the healers, the wise ones, those who understood the land and its secrets. Her mother was among them. The village was in turmoil, but no one would follow. No one would challenge the metalmen. They were too strong, too ruthless. So she came alone. She followed the trail of destruction, hoping to find something, anything that could help. And she found him. A monster who had just killed 6 armored hunters without a weapon. Her trust was not given lightly. It was born of pure, desperate need. There were no other options left. No other hope. She assessed the risk differently than an adult might. Where they saw certain death, she saw a sliver of possibility. Her calculation was simple. He was strong, and her mother was gone. The rest, the stories, the warnings, the very real chance he might turn on her didn't matter. Need overshadowed reason. She repeated her plea, her small hands clenched at her sides. Mighty man, please, my mother was taken by enemies. The words were not a request. They were a verdict. A judgment on what he was and what he must now become. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had just moments ago been bleeding, the hands that had closed those wounds through some unnatural process, the hands that had likely killed the hunters surrounding them. They didn't feel like his. But they were all he had. He met her eyes, The fear was still there, but beneath it was a steel resolve that mirrored the tension coiling in his own muscles. She wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. His existence, whatever it was, had intersected with her tragedy. To refuse her was to deny the only purpose that had presented itself in the void of his memory. It was not a choice between helping or not helping. It was a choice between meaning and nothingness. He gave a single slow nod. The Wanderer was gone. The Protector, however reluctant, had been summoned. His first instinct was to move, to put distance between himself and the dead, between himself and the small green child who watched him with those knowing eyes. Every signal in his body screamed at him to run. He was a hazard, a walking detonation waiting for a trigger. Solitude was the only logical choice, to find a place to hide, to understand the mechanics of this body that healed too fast and moved with killing grace. But the girl did not let him go. He took 3 long strides away from the clearing, his legs carrying him with a fluid speed that felt both alien and disturbingly natural. He heard her small footsteps behind him, a light but persistent patter on the leaf litter. He didn't look back. He increased his pace, pushing through undergrowth, his mind a blank wall of insistence. Leave. Go. Alone. The rustle behind him doubled, then matched his new speed. She was running now, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, but she did not call out. She just followed. Her silence was more damning than any shout. He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. She skidded to a halt 10 feet away, her chest heaving, her eyes wide but unyielding. He tried to form the words to send her away, to tell her he was the last person she should be near. The language felt clumsy on his tongue, the sentiment false even as he thought it. He saw his own reflection in her dark pupils, a tall unknown figure smeared with dirt and another man's blood. He was the monster from her village's stories, and yet she stood her ground. Her need was a tether, pulling him back from the edge of flight. He gave up. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a weary acceptance. He walked back to the clearing, to the dead hunters. His movements were economical, practiced. He knelt beside one of the bodies, his fingers probing the unfamiliar clasps and seals of the armor with an intuition he didn't possess. The mechanism released with a quiet hiss. He pulled a blade from a hip sheath. It was long, slightly curved, with a dull gray finish that absorbed the light. The weight of it in his hand was a familiar ghost. It felt right. It felt like a part of him he'd mislaid, and that feeling was utterly wrong. He looked at the girl. Hey. She pointed east, her small arm unwavering. That way, she said, her voice steadier now. They took her that way. The forest in that direction was thicker, the shadows deeper. It was the path of more violence, more of the unknown he represented. He could still turn. He could still choose the clean emptiness of isolation. But the blade in his hand and the child at his side had already decided for him. His moral compass, wiped clean of memory, still pointed true. It was a simple equation. A dead existed, a life needed defending. His own confusion was irrelevant. He slid the blade into his own makeshift belt, the cold metal a constant reminder against his hip. He nodded to A and started walking east. He did not look back to see if she followed. He knew she would. The Wanderer was gone, left bleeding in the dirt of that clearing. What walked east was something else. A protector, forged not in courage but in profound bone-deep reluctance. Her need was the only landmark in the fog of his mind, and he would follow it until either it or he was gone. The trees thinned, giving way to rocky hillsides strewn with the wreckage of a conflict Kane didn't understand. Glinting metal and shattered plastic littered the ground. Strange angular structures stood half-buried in the soil, their purpose unclear. The air carried a faint, acrid smell of ozone and overheated circuits. This was no natural landscape. It was a graveyard for machines. A walked beside him, her small voice cutting the silence. She spoke of the metalmen, their thunder sticks that could put a man to sleep from 100 paces. Their flying eyes, small silver discs that watched from above, reporting every movement. She said they weren't just raiders. They were collectors. They came for knowledge. They sought the healers who understood the plants and the currents of the earth. They took the thinkers who could read the weather in the stones and the storytellers who held the history of her people in their minds. They didn't just conquer. They catalogued. Kane listened, his eyes scanning the terrain. None of it sparked a memory. The descriptions were just words. Yet something in the pattern felt familiar. The tactics. The efficient, targeted acquisition of key assets. The use of surveillance and non-lethal force when possible. It felt like a doctrine. A half-remembered lecture from a forgotten life. It was a feeling in his muscles, not his mind. His boot kicked a small cylindrical object half hidden in the dust. He bent and picked it up. It was an energy cell, its casing scored with precise geometric lines and a single glyph he couldn't read. The moment his fingers closed around it, a sharp stabbing pain flared behind his eyes. His vision blurred for a second. A ghost image flashed. A rifle stock, a power indicator glowing green, the weight of a weapon snug against his shoulder. Then it was gone. The pain receded to a dull throb. The cell felt cold and inert in his hand. His body, it seemed, remembered the tools of war even if his mind did not. A saw the object and her breath caught. She pointed a shaky finger at the glyph. Corvian, she whispered, the word heavy with fear and reverence. She said the metalmen feared the Corvians above all else, that they built their weapons, designed their armor, planned their entire presence here as a defense against a threat her world had never seen. Her people were caught in the middle. Their land was a battlefield. Their knowledge was a resource to be mined for a war they didn't start and didn't want. The metalmen were not conquerors for glory. They were desperate men building a barricade, and her people were the bricks. Kane turned the energy cell over in his hand. The pieces shifted, locking into a new, more dangerous configuration. He was not just a weapon, he was a specific tool. His design, his very existence, was an answer to a question this child had just given a name. The Corvians, he was a key, but the lock it was meant to fit was still a mystery, hidden in the fog of his past and the motives of his creators. His purpose narrowed, sharpened to a fine point. Find her mother, find the healer they had taken, and in doing so, find the first clue to the war he was clearly built to fight. The rescue was no longer just an act of penance. It was reconnaissance. The trail ended at a wall of stone. A narrow fissure, almost invisible against the cliff face, marked the entrance. A moved ahead, her small hand brushing a specific pattern on the rock. A hidden door slid open without a sound. Inside, the air changed. It was cooler, smelling of damp earth and cooking fires. The village was built into the mountain itself, homes carved from living rock connected by rope bridges and steep stairways. People with skin the same vibrant green as A's stopped their work to stare. Their expressions were a mix of shock, fear, and a sliver of desperate hope. They saw A first, relief washing over their faces. Then they saw him. The silence that fell was heavy, complete. An old woman stepped forward. Her back was straight, her movement slow and deliberate. Her eyes, the color of dark moss, held a depth of years that Kane could feel. This was Sora. She looked at A, then her gaze settled on him. It was a physical weight. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Her eyes traced the lines of his face, the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself. She saw the metalman's work in his unnatural stillness, in the latent power coiled in his frame. Her voice, when it came, was low and raspy, like stone grinding on stone. You are like them, she said. It wasn't a question. And you are not. She stepped closer, her piercing gaze locking with his. I see a war in your eyes, she continued. A conflict that is not of this world. There is a pain there that does not belong to a man. She saw past the surface, into the churning void where his memories should have been. She recognized the shape of his emptiness. The tribe watched, their fear a palpable force. They saw a monster from their worst stories standing in the heart of their home. But their fear of the metalmen was a sharper, more immediate terror. It was the fear of losing everything, of being erased. He was a new variable, an unknown. And sometimes the unknown is better than a certain end. They offered him a place to sit by the central fire. A young man brought a bowl of stew, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it over. A woman offered a woven cloak to replace his torn clothes. The hospitality was real, born of a deep cultural code of aid, but it was edged with a caution so sharp it was almost a threat. They gave him space. Their eyes never truly left him. They were reading him, assessing 1,000 tiny cues. The way he held the bowl, the focus of his attention, the lack of idle movement. They were deciding if he was a tool they could use or a danger they would have to contain. Sora sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. Your coming changes the balance, she said, her voice soft but carrying to every ear in the cavern. It may be for the good of my people. It may be for ruin. The world turns on such moments. She was not welcoming him. She was stating a fact. His presence was an event, a storm on the horizon. They would give him shelter, food, information, not as a guest, but as one might feed and care for a captured predator, hoping to point its fury at a common enemy. Their acceptance was a transaction, a gamble. They were betting their future that his violence would flow outward, not inward. Kane ate the stew. It was rich and earthy. He felt the weight of their collective stare, the burden of their fragile hope. It settled on his shoulders like a chain, linking him to this place, these people. It was another tether to a past he didn't own and a future he couldn't predict. He was no longer just a weapon lost in the woods. He was a weapon someone had decided to aim. The responsibility of it was a cold, heavy stone in his gut. He looked at Sora and gave a single, slow nod. The deal was struck. He would be their instrument, for now. The hunters gathered around a fire pit, their faces tight with grim experience. One of them unrolled a large hide, its surface marked with dark pigments and precise lines. The map showed the valley to the east, the river bend, and the metalmen's camp. It was a detailed sketch of a fortress, a perimeter wall of light and metal, guard towers at each cardinal point, patrol routes marked with dotted lines that showed overlapping circles of coverage. They knew this place. They had watched it for a long time. A frontal assault was out of the question. The hunters spoke of it in low, hard voices. They had tried before. The metalmen's weapons cut through their strongest armor like it was parchment. Their spears shattered against the energy shields. Their best fighters had fallen without getting close. The camp was a death trap for anyone approaching with force. The only thing that had saved them from total annihilation was the metalmen's apparent lack of interest in finishing the job. They were there to take, not to exterminate. But no system is perfect. The oldest hunter, a man with a scar across his jaw, pointed a thick finger at the map. He traced the path of a single guard along the western wall. Then he traced another, moving in the opposite direction. Their routes were timed, precise, and predictable. They were creatures of habit. For 3 heartbeats, their fields of vision did not overlap. A small section of the wall was left unobserved. A blind spot, a window. It happened once every 15 minutes. It was the only flaw in an otherwise impenetrable defense. Kane studied the lines on the hide. He did not see a drawing. He saw angles of approach. He saw timing. He saw a problem to be solved. The pattern felt familiar in a way that was deeper than memory. It was like reading his own genetic code. This was a language he understood. The logic of security, the rhythm of patrols, the predictable nature of any system built and maintained by living beings. They all had weaknesses. They all had a seam that could be pried apart. The hunters looked at him. They had seen his speed in the forest clearing. They had seen the bodies. They knew what he could do. Their hope was a heavy, silent thing in the air between them. They had no other options. Their strength was not enough. Their courage was not enough. They needed something else. They needed a tool that could fit through a 3-second window. He spoke before the thought was fully formed. "I'll go alone." The words were quiet, but they cut through the nervous tension. A solo infiltration, not a frontal assault. A surgical strike, stealth, not strength, using their pattern against them. It was the only way. He was the only one who could move fast enough, quiet enough to exploit that tiny gap. His body was designed for this kind of precision, even if his mind rebelled against it. The plan was set. It was simple and terrifying. He would use the blind spot. He would be a ghost in and out before the guards completed their next rotation. The hunters nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and new dread. They were committing their only hope to a man they did not know, on a plan that relied on a flaw they could only hope still existed. It was a gamble with the highest stakes. He prepared in silence. He checked the blade he had taken, tested its edge. He moved through a series of stretches, his muscles warming with a low hum of readiness. His body was responding to the clear objective, the defined parameters. It hummed with a purpose he still didn't understand, a programming that was waking up. He was a key being slid into a lock. He just hoped it would open the right door. The cold deepened with the night, pulling a thin mist from the damp ground. The air carried a low, constant hum from the east, the sound of distant generators working through the dark. Kane moved toward it, his form a deeper shadow among the trees. The forest fell away and the wall rose before him, a barrier of stark white light and dull metal 20 feet high. It hummed with the same energy as the generators, a subtle vibration he felt in his teeth. Guards walked the perimeter. Their armor was smooth, segmented, catching the harsh light. They carried sleek rifles. their design unlike any wood or forged metal he had seen. He knew with a certainty that felt implanted that those weapons did not fire bullets. They projected silent, sleeping energy. A direct hit would not kill. It would just shut a body down, making it easy to collect. Their patrol was a tight, overlapping dance. Each turn, each pause was timed to perfection. No wasted movement. No random glances. It was a system, and all systems have a rhythm. He found a patch of deep shadow behind a storage container and went still. He closed his eyes. He did not think. He listened. He matched his breathing to the cadence of the nearest guard's footsteps. 8 paces north. A pause, a scan. 8 paces south. His own heartbeat slowed, falling into the same measured tempo. His body seemed to know this waiting, this patient, predatory stillness. His awareness stretched out, taking in every detail. The shift of gravel under a boot, the faint click of a rifle strap adjusting, the sigh of the night wind. Time itself seemed to slow, each second stretching out, becoming a space he could move through. Studies of elite soldiers note this altered state. In high-stakes scenarios, perception sharpens. The brain processes information faster. Seconds feel like minutes. The world narrows to angles of approach, sound, and timing. It is not a supernatural gift. It is a honed skill, a focus born of training and survival. For Kane, it felt less like a skill and more like a switch being thrown, a function activating. His body was running a program his mind had never learned. The 3-second window arrived. The Western Guard turned at the end of his route. The Eastern Guard was hidden by the curve of a tower. The seam in their coverage was open. It was not a thought. It was an impulse. He moved. His muscles uncoiled with a force that was barely contained. He was a blur across the open ground, his footsteps making no sound on the packed earth. He did not run along the wall. He went up it. His fingers found microscopic seams in the metal plating. His body twisted, using momentum and a strength that felt limitless. He cleared the top in one fluid motion, a dark shape against the glare of the lights. He dropped down on the other side, landing in a crouch on clean, fabricated flooring. The air inside was different, sterile, cool. It smelled of recycled oxygen and a sharp chemical cleaner. It burned his lungs, a stark contrast to the organic rot of the forest. The hum was louder here, a pervasive thrumming in the walls and floor. He was inside the perimeter. The first barrier was broken. He rose from his crouch, his eyes scanning the new environment. Corridors branched off in several directions, all brightly lit, all empty for the moment. The real challenge began now. The exterior was a locked door. The interior was a maze, and somewhere in its heart was the woman he was sent to find. The hunt began in the sterile, artificial belly of the beast. The hallway ended at a set of double doors that hissed open as he approached. The air changed. It grew colder, sharper. The clean, bright light of the corridor gave way to a softer, blue-tinged glow. The walls here were lined not with metal, but with transparent panels. Behind them, people sat or lay on narrow cots. Their skin was the familiar green of A's people. They were alive. Their chests rose and fell, but their eyes were empty. They stared at nothing. Their postures were slumped, defeated. They had been broken not by pain, but by the removal of hope. This was not a prison. It was a collection, a lab for living specimens. His gaze swept the room, taking in the sterile tables, the glowing screens full of data he couldn't read, the quiet hum of machinery that monitored heart rates and brainwaves. Then he saw her, in the third cell on the left, a woman with the same high cheekbones and determined set to her jaw as the child who had sent him here. Her eyes were not empty. They were watchful, calculating. They flicked to him, assessing, weighing. This was Nima, the master healer, the reason he was here. He moved toward her cell, his own reflection ghosting across the clear surface. His eyes caught on one of the larger screens mounted on a central console. Words scrolled in a language he somehow understood. Project Guardian. Below it, lists of names, villagers, their vital signs. Notes on psychic resilience and environmental attunement. The language was cold, clinical. It turned people into data points. Problems to be solved, resources to be utilized. It was the kind of language that allowed for anything. That erased the line between person and product. A soft chime sounded. A column of light erupted from the console, resolving into a 3-dimensional image. A man in a clean white coat, his face neutral. A recorded message began to play. Final report. Project Guardian. Subject Specimen 7, Kane froze. The voice was calm, dispassionate. It listed attributes: enhanced muscular density, accelerated synaptic response, cellular regeneration via triggered metabolic override. The words described his body, his speed, his healing. The voice continued. Primary flaw: uncontrollable aggressive response to high-stress scenarios. A danger to operational cohesion. The hologram shifted, showing a schematic of a spacecraft crashing into a forest. Transport vessel NC-17 compromised during atmospheric entry. Specimen 7 activated survival protocol. All other units terminated. The image changed again, showing a double helix, one side familiar, one side alien in green. Proposed stability solution: hybridization protocol. Integration of indigenous genetic markers may suppress hostile impulses and promote territorial bonding behaviors. The local population represents a viable biological resource for this recalibration. The words hung in the air. Specimen 7. Viable biological resource. Recalibration. They were not words for a person. They were words for a tool, a malfunctioning piece of hardware. The hollowness in his chest yawned wide open. He was not a man who had lost his memory. He was a product, a failed experiment. His rage, his confusion, the alien power in his limbs, it was all by design. And the people in these cells, the woman who watched him with her intelligent eyes, the child who trusted him, they were not allies. They were the patch for his broken code, a stability solution. His hands clenched at his sides. The weapon looked at the key it was supposed to fit and for the first time understood the lock was its own soul. The hologram cast a cold blue light across his face. Kane stood before it motionless. This was his creation story, not a birth. A manufacturing report. It detailed 15 years of work. Design, testing, repeated failure. A list of enhancements read like a weapons manifest. Strength, speed, regeneration. Each entry was a line of code in his DNA. The project had one purpose: combat efficiency against the Corvians. He was engineered for a single, brutal function. The crash of transport vessel NC-17 was a footnote in the report. An unforeseen variable. The ship went down. The mission was compromised. He was stranded here, a tool separated from its user's hand. His programmed aggression, a feature in a controlled war zone, became a bug in this new environment. A danger to the mission's new objective. The solution was not to fix him. It was to patch the problem. The local population, with their unique biology, represented a viable biological resource. Their genetic markers could be a stabilizing agent, a leash for a dangerous animal. His rage was not a flaw of character. It was a design error. Their world was not a home. It was a pharmacy. Its people were ingredients. The voice of the scientist echoed in the sterile air, a ghost from a past he never lived. This world is a resource. The words were flat, devoid of malice or passion. It was a simple statement of fact from a man who saw living beings as variables in an equation. Bioethicists would later note this precise failure. When you weaponize life, you must strip away its personhood. Function always comes first. The well-being of the weapon is irrelevant. Its autonomy is a flaw to be engineered out. He was never meant to be free. He was meant to be a slave to a war he knew nothing about. A dog on a chain waiting for a command to kill. The rage he felt then was hot and sudden. It was a fire in his veins, a pressure behind his eyes. It was the same fury that had taken the hunters in the forest. For a second, it consumed him. He wanted to smash the console, to tear the hologram apart, to reduce this clean clinical room to rubble. But the anger felt too perfect, too targeted. It rose on cue, a programmed response to a high-stress scenario, just as the report said it would. This was not his rage. It was theirs. It was a leash they had built into him, a way to ensure he remained a compliant weapon. The fire was not his own. It was a trigger waiting for a finger. He took a slow, measured breath. The cold air of the lab filled his lungs. He forced the fire down. He looked away from the glowing report of his own existence. His eyes found the cells lining the wall. The captives. The resources. He saw Nima watching him, her intelligent gaze taking in his stillness, his internal struggle. She was not a resource. She was a person, a mother, a healer. Her freedom, and the freedom of every person in this room, was now the only thing that mattered. His first act would not be one of programmed violence. It would be an act of defiance. He would choose to protect, Not because he was designed to, but because it was right. The weapon would use its strength for something its creators never intended. It would break its own chain. Kane's fist connected with the control panel beside Nima's cell. The transparent surface didn't crack. It shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces that rained down onto the sterile floor with a sound like falling ice. The door slid open. Nima did not flinch. She did not gasp. She stepped forward, her movements steady and sure. Her eyes were not the hollow, defeated eyes of the other captives. They were sharp, intelligent, and fierce. They looked at him, and they did not see a savior or a monster. They saw a tool. A very specific tool for a very specific job. She understood what he was in that single glance. The distant thud of heavy boots echoed down the corridor. Not a run yet, a quickening pace. They were coming. The alarm would sound any second. Nima didn't waste a breath on questions. She didn't ask who he was or why he was there. Her assessment was instant and complete. She saw his tension, the way he held his body like a sprung trap. She saw the weapon he was, and she saw the need in him for something to temper the steel. Her hand went to a small woven pouch tied at her waist. She pulled it free and thrust it toward him. "For their sleep stings," she said, her voice low and urgent. "It will clear your head." It was a dark powder that smelled of crushed herbs and dry earth. It was the tribe's answer to the metalman's technology, a direct, practical countermeasure born from generations of knowledge of this world. He took the pouch. His fingers brushed against hers. Her skin was warm. His was cold. The other captives were stirring now, pressing against the open doors of their cells. Their faces were pale with fear and sedation, but a new light was kindling in their eyes. It was a fragile thing, that hope. It could be snuffed out by a single wrong move. They looked to him, then to Nima. Their trust was a silent, burning demand. He was their only chance. He tucked the pouch into his belt. He turned toward the corridor exit, becoming their point. Their shield. He was a shepherd leading the lost out of a steel pasture. The first guard rounded the corner at a jog, his rifle coming up. He saw the open cells. He saw the freed prisoners. His surprise lasted less than a second. It was all the time Kane needed. He moved. There was no thought, no decision. His body reacted to the threat with a programming that was finally being used for a purpose he chose. He was a blur of motion. He closed the distance before the guard's finger could find the trigger. His hand struck the rifle barrel, deflecting it upward. His other hand drove forward, palm heel striking the guard's chest plate. The man flew backward, crashing into the wall with a dull crunch of metal and bone. He slid to the floor and did not move. The short, sharp violence was over in a heartbeat. The corridor was silent again, except for the hum of the lights and the ragged breathing of the captives. Kane stood over the fallen guard, his own breath coming slow and even. The action had felt clean, precise. It was the same lethal efficiency that had killed the hunters in the forest. But it was different now. It was focused, directed. His programming, his design for violence, was now their shield. He was using the weapon they built in him to break the cage they had built for others. The escape was on. The maze of the base lay ahead, but he was no longer lost in it. He had a direction, he had a purpose, and he had an answer for their sleep stings. A sharp pain bit into the meat of Kane's shoulder. He grunted, his hand going to the small dart protruding from his jacket. He pulled it free, the barbed tip slick with blood. The effect was immediate and alarming. A cold numbness spread from the wound. A wave of leaden weakness flowing down his arm and into his chest. His vision blurred at the edges, the clean lines of the corridor softening into a fuzzy gray haze. His legs buckled. He caught himself against the wall, his breathing suddenly heavy and labored. It was the old weakness, the one the report had detailed. His body was designed to fail. Without external control, it defaulted to a safe state, a vulnerability they had built into him. He fumbled for the pouch at his belt, his fingers feeling thick and clumsy. He ripped the tie open and raised it to his face. He inhaled deeply. The powder was fine and dry. It filled his nose with a sharp herbal scent, crushed leaves, dry earth, something metallic underneath. It was the smell of the forest, of the world they wanted to mine. For a second, nothing happened. The numbness continued its slow crawl. Then a jolt went through him. It was like cold water thrown on a sleeping man. The fog in his head shredded. The heaviness in his limbs vanished, replaced by a sharp, clean hum of energy. The numbness receded, rolling back from his core like a tide. His vision snapped back into perfect, brutal focus. The strength that returned was different. It was his. He could feel the difference in the way his muscles answered his commands. It was no longer a wild, semi-autonomous force. It was an extension of his will. The guard who had fired the dart was advancing, his rifle lowering, confident the target was neutralized. He saw Kane straighten up. He saw the clarity in his eyes. The guard's step faltered. His surprise was a perfect, silent opening. Kane didn't roar. He didn't give in to the hot rush of programmed rage that was begging to take over. He moved with a cold, precise fury that was entirely his own. It was a focused thing, a tool. He closed the distance in 2 steps. His hand shot out, deflecting the rifle barrel. His other hand drove into the guard's throat, just above the armor's collar. It was not a killing blow. It was a statement. The man dropped, clawing at his neck, gasping for air he couldn't find. The act was clean, surgical. It was the first thing he had done since waking that felt 100% his. The powder was more than an antidote. It was a key. It had broken a lock deep inside him. The designer's leash, the chemical failsafe meant to keep him compliant, was gone. He was no longer just a reactive weapon, a specimen to be controlled and retrieved. The native knowledge of this world, handed to him in a small woven pouch, had given him back his body. He was Kane. And for the first time he understood what that meant. He was angry, not with the hot, blind rage of his programming, but with a cold, simmering fury at the people who had tried to make him a slave in his own skin. The fight had just become personal. They found a service lift at the end of a maintenance corridor. It was a simple platform on a hydraulic piston, meant for moving equipment. Kane hit the manual override. The controls sparked under his hand, but the platform groaned and began to rise. It carried them up through a shaft toward a square of night sky. The cold, clean air of the surface hit them. It smelled of freedom. But it was a lie, the fence was still there. They had breached the building, not the perimeter. The wall of crackling energy rose before them, a deadly curtain of blue-white light. It hummed with a deep, resonant frequency that vibrated in their bones. From below, the sound of pursuit grew louder, shouted orders. The heavy thud of armored boots on metal stairs. They were trapped between the barrier and the hunters. The platform reached its highest point and locked into place with a final shuddering clang. They had a way up, but no way out. Kane's eyes scanned the fence. It wasn't a solid wall of light. It was a grid. The energy arced between physical emitters mounted on pylons. Where there was a physical component, there was a weakness, a seam, a point of failure. Engineering principles stated that any energy field, no matter how advanced, relies on a physical structure to contain and direct its power. That structure can be broken. The emitters were the key, but the gap between the platform and the nearest pylon was 20 feet of open, deadly air. There was no time for a careful plan. He saw only one path. Straight through. It was not a decision made with reason. It was an instinct, a brutal calculation of force and sacrifice. He turned to the freed prisoners huddled on the platform. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with a fear that was now mixed with a fragile, desperate hope. He did not speak. There were no words that would make this right. He simply moved. He pushed them down onto the metal deck, using his own body as a shield. He covered them, his back to the fence, his arms spread wide. He was the barrier between them and the energy. It was a terrible, simple equation. His life designed to withstand immense punishment against the manufactured lightning of his creators. He drove his foot down on the platform's emergency release. The mechanism sheared with a scream of tearing metal. The platform lurched forward, its momentum carrying it on a shallow arc toward the fence. For a second they were flying. Then they hit. The impact was not a sound. It was a feeling, a concussive wave of pure force that slammed the air from his lungs. The world turned white, blue energy erupted around them, arcing over his back and shoulders. It felt like being struck by 1,000 fists at once. The smell was immediate and brutal. Ozone so sharp it burned the throat. The acrid stench of his own hair and jacket burning. The metal platform groaned under the strain, its surface cracking under the energy discharge. Then they were through. The platform crashed down on the rocky ground outside the perimeter, skidding several feet before grinding to a halt. The energy field flickered angrily behind them, a wounded beast. The night air was cold on his seared skin. They were free, but they were not safe. They were in the open, exposed on the high ground. The base alarms wailed, painting the cliffs with sweeping red lights. From the rocks above, movement. Dark shapes rose up. the tribe's warriors. They did not cheer. They acted. Spears flew through the air, not aimed to kill the pursuing guards in their advanced armor, but to distract, to harry. The thrown shafts clattered against chest plates and helmets, drawing fire, creating confusion. It was a gesture of pure courage. They were buying time with their lives, giving the escapees a chance to scatter into the relative safety of the cliffs. The cost of their freedom was written in the sparks of energy bolts deflecting off stone, and the determined cries of the warriors holding the line. A man stepped from the shadow of a downed shuttle. He wore a clean white coat, unmarked by the dirt of the ridge. He was unarmed. His hands were empty. His face held no fear. It held the calm, detached confidence of a man who believes he holds all the cards. He looked past the tribesman, past Nima, his eyes settling on Kane. He did not see a person. He saw a product, an asset that had gone off script. Specimen 7, he said. The words were flat, analytical. Return to your purpose. He spoke of the Corvian threat as if reading from a briefing. A distant war. Billions of lives hanging in the balance. A conflict of such scale that it made their entire presence here, their actions, seem not just justified but necessary. He called Kane's defiance a malfunction, a coding error, a glitch in an otherwise perfect weapon. His rebellion was not an act of will. It was a system failure to be corrected. The greater good demanded it. This world is a resource, the scientist said. His tone was matter-of-fact, devoid of malice. It was a simple statement of operational reality. Its people are tools for a greater good. The indigenous knowledge, the unique biology, even the raw materials of the planet itself, they were all just components. Variables in a grand equation where the survival of billions outweighed the freedom of thousands. The individual was always sacrificed for the collective in this cold math. It was a philosophy that built empires and justified horrors throughout history, turning living beings into inventory. Kane listened, but his eyes were elsewhere. He looked at A, her small hand clutching her mother's tunic. He saw the fierce intelligence in Nima's gaze, the quiet strength that had endured captivity. He saw the tribesmen standing their ground behind him, their spears held tight, their faces set against the impossible. They were not resources. They were not tools. They were people. They had names. They had a right to their own world. The scientist's words were a cage. They tried to lock him back into the narrow purpose they had designed for him, but the powder from Nima's pouch had cleared more than just the chemical leash from his veins. It had cleared his sight. He saw the lie in the grand design. A greater good built on the backs of the enslaved was not good at all. It was just another form of tyranny. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low. It did not carry the heat of his programmed rage. It carried the cold, final weight of granite. It cut through the scientist's clinical lecture. Tell your commanders this world is protected. The statement was simple, absolute. It was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. The scientist's confidence shattered. His calm superior mask cracked. For the first time, he looked at Kane and did not see a malfunctioning machine. He saw a will, a choice. His weapon had not just broken its leash. It had chosen its own target. The arrogance of the creator collapsed under the weight of the creation's autonomy. The man in the white coat took a step back, his calculations failing, his control evaporating into the cold night air. Kane turned away from him. The conversation was over. His purpose was no longer a question to be debated by men in labs. It was a statement written in the resolve on the faces of the people beside him and the smoking ruin of the fence behind them. He was their protector. That was all that mattered. The ridge fell quiet. The metalmen were gone, their machines pulling back into the sky. The red alarm lights flickered and died, leaving only the pale moonlight and the lingering smell of ozone. The village was safe for now. The tribespeople emerged from the rocks, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. They moved among the fallen, tending to their wounded, their quiet voices a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. The fight was over. The aftermath had begun. They built a fire in the central cavern. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Sora, the elder, approached Kane. Her face was solemn. She did not bow. She offered him a place by the fire, a home, a purpose here with them. The offer was real. It was warm. He could see the life it promised. A place to belong, a people to protect, a chance to leave the confusion of his past behind and build something new. The temptation was a physical pull, a warm weight in his chest. but his mind would not let him rest. The words from the lab report echoed in his skull. Specimen 7. Uncontrollable aggression. The image of the crashed transport vessel hung in his thoughts. The mention of the Corvians, the war he was built for. He looked around the fire at the faces of the tribe. Their resilience, their courage. They had just won a battle, but his presence had drawn the fight to them. He was a magnet for conflict, a trigger for a war this world never wanted. To stay was to make their home a permanent target. His very nature was a danger to the peace they sought. He understood the impulse to exile himself. It was a common thread in those who feared the damage they could inflict. The urge to remove a threat even if the threat was yourself, to protect others by leaving them behind. It was not a decision born of pride or anger. It was one of painful, pragmatic care. His fight was not here. It was at the source. His answers and his true enemy lay elsewhere. He declined. The words were quiet but firm.
He thanked Sora. He thanked the tribe.
But his path led north, to the wreckage, to the truth of what he was. A silence fell over the gathering. It was not a rejection of them, but an acceptance of his own cursed nature. A stepped forward from her mother's side. Her small face was set with a determination that mirrored his own. "I'll learn healing," she said, her voice clear in the quiet cavern. "I'll practice while you're gone. I will learn to help you control the fire inside." It was a vow, a promise that his journey would not be alone, even in his absence. A child's belief that the monster could be mended. Sora nodded slowly. She understood. She motioned to a craftsman who brought forward a necklace. It was a simple cord, but from it hung a pendant of worked metal, blue-black and smooth. It was fashioned from the finest weapon metal the tribe possessed. It was not just a gift. It was a symbol, an acceptance, a bond that would not break. It said that his strength was their strength. His enemies were their enemies. He was part of them no matter where his path led. Kane took the necklace. The metal was cool against his skin. He fastened it around his neck. It felt like a weight and an anchor. He looked at Nima, at the faces of the tribe ringed around the fire. He made a promise of his own. "I will return." But first he had to journey into the heart of his own creation. The protector turned away from the warmth of the fire and looked toward the cold, unknown north. The road to his past waited. The morning air was cold and clear. Nima found him watching the sun rise over the eastern ridges. She did not offer more food or another plea to stay. She simply pointed north. "The metal bird fell there," she said, her voice quiet. "The place of your awakening. The answers you seek will be found in its bones." The crash site of transport vessel NC-17. It was more than a location. It was the grave of his old life. The place where Specimen 7 began and the man named Kane was born from the wreckage. What would he find there? The report from the lab played in his mind. More twisted metal and shattered glass, certainly. But also perhaps the ghosts of his creation. Were there others like him? Subjects that did not survive the crash? The report had mentioned a Subject 12. A name, a designation that suggested he was not the first nor the last. Was it a brother in design? A predecessor? A failed model? The mystery of it was a hook in his gut pulling him north. He was no longer just searching for a way to control the fire in his veins. He was searching for kin, for context. His journey was no longer about rescue. That debt was paid. It was about discovery. The need to understand the mechanics of his own soul had become the only compass that mattered. He needed to pick through the debris of his own origin story. The distribution of wreckage, the condition of components, each piece could tell a part of the tale. A broken data cell might hold a log entry. A shattered pod might show how many had been aboard. The site was a crime scene, and he was both the detective and the victim. He left as the sun cleared the cliffs. He took only a waterskin in the blade. He did not look back at the village waking behind him. His face was set toward the broken country to the north, his back to the only warmth he had known. He felt a small, focused presence watching him go. He did not need to turn to know it was A. Her small figure was a silent sentinel on the ridge, a promise that this was not an ending. It was a pause, a vow that she would be there, stronger and wiser when he returned. The protector was gone. In his place walked the seeker. Every step was driven by the first true question that had formed in the void of his mind upon waking. The question that had been buried under violence and immediate need. Who am I? The war for this world, for the village and its people, was paused. The metalmen had retreated to regroup, to reassess their lost asset. But the larger war, the one he was built for against the unseen Corvians, was a distant thunder. The immediate battle, the one that mattered most, was the war for his own soul. It was a conflict that would not be fought with blades or strength, but with truth. And it began at the place where his old life had ended in fire and impact. The road north was long, but for the first time he knew his destination. The metal of the necklace felt cold against his skin, a constant, chilling reminder of the warmth he had left behind. The sun was high, but it offered little heat. He walked north, the scientist's words replaying in a cold loop in his mind. A resource, a tool, created specifically to combat the Corvian threat. The language was a cage. It tried to define him, to reduce every action to a function, every choice to a calculation. The weight of it was a physical pressure on his chest. Was his desire to protect just another line of code? The instinct to shield to stand between the tribe and their enemies? Was it a genuine moral impulse or a clever bit of programming designed to ensure his cooperation? The hybridization protocol the report mentioned. Was his care for her nothing more than an engineered territorial bonding behavior? A leash made of fondness instead of chemicals? He had no memory of a life before the crash. No childhood, no loves, no losses to prove he was ever truly human. He had nothing to define himself by except his actions in the present moment. Philosophical debates on free will often circle this same drain. Can a choice be truly free if the chooser was designed for a specific purpose? Is a weapon that chooses not to kill exercising free will? Or is that defiance itself just a deeper, more complex layer of its intended function? The questions were a maze with no exit. They led him in circles, each turn bringing him back to the same cold fact of his origin. He was a military asset, the culmination of Project Guardian. His body was a map of someone else's war. A sharp cry cut through his thoughts. A small furred creature was tangled in a thicket of thorny vines off the path. One of its legs was twisted at a bad angle, caught tight. It struggled weakly, its cries growing fainter. The old instinct rose in him immediately. The one from the lab. Assess, neutralize, eliminate distractions. A threat to operational security. He could walk on. It was the logical choice. The expected choice. Instead, he stopped. He knelt. His hands, the same hands that had caved in armored chest plates, moved with a deliberate gentleness. He didn't rip the vines apart. He carefully worked his fingers into the tangle, loosening the strands one by one. The creature stopped struggling, its large dark eyes watching him. He could feel the rapid beat of its heart through its fur. He freed the injured leg, his touch light. The action required patience. It required a focus on something other than efficiency or force. It felt right. The careful attention, the minimization of pain, the simple act of aiding something weaker than himself. It felt like his. Not a program running, not a function fulfilling a parameter. It was a quiet internal yes, a confirmation that existed outside the cold logic of his design. He stood, watching the creature limp away into the undergrowth. The resolution settled over him not as a shouted truth, but as a quiet certainty. His origin was a fact. It was a chain of events in a lab he never knew. But his choices were his own. They were the only things he truly owned. Every decision to help, to protect, to be gentle, each one was a hammer strike on the forge of his identity. The weapon may have been assembled in a sterile room by men in white coats, but the man was being built right here on this broken road, with every step he chose to take. The northern horizon was no longer a clean line. A thin, dark smudge of smoke stained the sky, a distant marker of the crash he was walking toward. It was the only landmark he had. Every step on the broken ground brought new questions. They piled up in his mind, each one heavier than the last. The war he was built for was a void, a conflict designed by strangers for reasons he did not know. Who were the Corvians? The name was just a sound, a label for a threat manufactured in some distant command center. Were they monsters? Conquerors? Were they even the real enemy? Or just a convenient excuse for the metalmen's hunger for resources? The report gave no answers. It only stated the threat as a fact, a justification for his entire existence. The lack of detail was its own kind of weapon. It left him fighting a shadow. Was he the only one? The report listed him as Specimen 7. The numbering suggested a process, a line of prototypes. Had the others been lost in other crashes on other worlds? Were there more like him, Scattered across the stars, each one a lost weapon trying to remember what it was? Or was Subject 12 still out there? A potential ally or a more perfected, more dangerous version of himself? The silence on the matter was a wide open space filled with doubt. Then there was the word, hybridization. It was the scientists' proposed solution. The key to stabilizing his aggression. It meant they had tried to patch his broken code with something from this world. Something from A's people. Their genetic markers were the fix. What did that mean for him? Was his connection to the child, his urge to protect her, just a side effect of that tampering, an engineered loyalty? And what did it mean for her people? Were they all just a collection of spare parts? A biological resource to be mined for the improvement of weapons like him? The ethical rod of that idea was a cold stone in his gut. Science fiction has always used such ideas to ask hard questions about where a person ends and a machine begins. About what it truly means to belong. His body was now a living map to that conflict. His very cells were a battlefield between his original design and the foreign DNA used to mend it. He was a question made of flesh and bone. Understanding that map was no longer just about curiosity. It was about survival. The scientist had called his aggression a flaw, but it was also his primary function. To control it, to truly own it, he needed to understand the mechanics of the patch. He needed to know what they had done to him. Otherwise, the fire inside might one day consume him, or worse, everyone around him. His self-discovery was no longer a philosophical journey. It was a tactical necessity. The mystery of his creation was no longer a burden to be shed. It was his only compass. It pointed north toward the wreckage and the truth. He adjusted the strap of his water skin and kept walking. The last hope of a green-skinned child was a small, warm ember in his chest, fueling the long, cold journey of a man who was something more and something less than human. The road ahead was paved with unanswered questions, and he would walk it until he found the answers or they found him. A weapon can be reforged in the fires of choice, not just design. Kane's path was laid out for him in cold labs and data streams, a purpose written in code. But a child's plea gave him a new one. His strength came from his creators, but its use became his own. The greatest power isn't what you're built to do. It's what you decide to do instead. His journey north is just beginning. A weapon seeking to become a man, walking away from the fire to find the hand that first lit the forge.